And now we have Galymzhan Kirbassov from Columbia University. He's going to talk about integrated approach in combating transnational crimes in Central Asia. Thank you for coming.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me to this discussion. And actually, I would like to speak more about in this regional integration issues. I want to shift focus not to institutional integration, like political integrations we've recently been experiencing, but more. I want to talk about the issue-based integration. So. Specifically, I want to talk about international terrorism, transnational terrorism in Central Asia, and how an integrated approach should be adopted to counter that threat. And because I'm educated here in the United States, I'll be bringing Afghanistan and Pakistan to this issue. And first, I wanted to have an integrated approach to fight transnational terrorism. We need to find out the causes of this terrorism and how it operates, how the mobilization goes on in this terrorism. So, if we know these causes, we can approach with our comprehensive strategy. So, one of the causes in the literature and in the scholarly literature of the terrorism and the rebellion and the insurgency have been cited as grievances, political grievances, or economic deprivation, political exclusion, discrimination against certain groups, ethnic groups, and those groups are not satisfied with their status in the country, and then they take up arms and rebel against the government. But more than that, there have been also scholars arguing that the grievances is not enough. It's there need to be some expected payoff from the participation to these groups and taking up arms, and some selective incentives so that every participant of these groups could benefit from participation. Material benefits. So, and but these after the Cold War, especially after the collapse of the Cold War, after the end of the Cold War, these causes of transnational terrorism was not enough to explain the activities, terrorist activities, because there could be political exclusion and grievances in one country, but those groups could get finances from other countries. So there are financial support from the different countries for the cause of another country. So to tackle these issues of transnational terrorism, we need to address all these issues, as I will come later. And currently, the Central Asia is experiencing threats from mainly two regions. One is Afghanistan, Pakistan, and another is Iraq and Syria. And for example, just to give an example from of threat from Afghanistan and Pakistan region, I just want to give an example of Islamic movement of Uzbekistan, and it started from operating from Tajikistan region, and then it moved to Afghanistan, and then moved to Pakistan, training, operating in different countries, getting their finances from different sources, and these kind of movements after the U.S. troop withdrawal totally from the Afghanistan can easily make their operations and trainings more easily in those regions and operate from those regions in Central Asia. So in an integrated approach to address the issue of transnational terrorism, we need to look at different points. For example, one is how these groups finance themselves. For example, just have an example of Afghanistan and Pakistan. The main source of their finance was production and trade of narcotics and opium, poppy cultivation, and illicit trade. For example, the U.S. In Afghanistan has spent $7.6 billion, as maybe you've read from the news, to fight the narcotic production and cultivation. But the UN data gives us that in 2013, opium poppy cultivation was at the record high, measured by the hectare of the cultivated opium poppies. And this means that so many resources was mobilized to counter this threat, but it wasn't very efficient, and because it needs more integrative approach, not only to destroy the poppies, but also to look at the demand side, to look at that how they transit from one country to another country, and border control, and all of these issues. If not approached as an integrated strategy, then just tackling one side won't solve the problem. And for example, to fight with specific groups and transnational terrorism that's coming from Afghanistan and Pakistan, there should be an integrated strategy that will involve international organizations like UN and the neighboring governments of Afghanistan and Afghan tribes that operate as very autonomously within the Afghanistan, and who has who can exercise really huge power. And elders in Afghanistan, they should be integrated in this approach. Mostly what UN and the US has been following in counterterrorism, they were mostly involving only governments of these nations, with excluding, they were not engaging really the community leaders and the elders and the civil societies, not in the formal form, but in the traditional form, without really integrating all of these actors. I don't think that a single strategy will solve the problem of transnational terrorism. And another threat coming from Iraq and Syria, as we all know that the ISIS and Al-Qaeda and related groups, they are financing their activities by selling oil and diesel to neighboring countries or in the States, and they estimate that it's $3 million per day they earn that much money. And it's not only they are using the networks of smuggling that was left in the from the 90s, when there was a UN and US embargo against Saddam Hussein, and there was a black market and smugglers that traded this oil, and those network of smuggling is being used right now again. And all of why am I telling this? Because just one approach, unilateral approach, and not integrated strategy to tackle these issues will not solve the problem in any way. That's why, for example, in this particular region, Iraq and Syria, for integrated strategy, we need to work with the international organizations as UN, EU, and Arab League, and the national governments of Iraq, Syria, and neighboring countries, and subnational entities like Kurdistan and possibly Free Syrian Army, and also religious and traditional authorities of power, which operates and which had been operating there in Iraq and Syria for hundreds of years. So without including all those subnational and very local communities and actors, just bombing and fighting those terrorists will not solve the problem. So recently we organized with the UN, specifically with UNITAR and the Yale University, we organized a workshop with representatives from Iraq and Syria and from the US, and how they see that the problem can be solved. And there was a representative of Ayatollah Sistani in the workshop, and from the Sunni groups we had religious leaders, and they all said that without going to these community level engagements and the very local engagements, you won't be able to cut the finances, cut the radicalization of the youth, and prevent their participation in the groups, and you won't be able to control the borders without integrating those very local actors. So by recently, you probably all know that UN Security Council have adopted a resolution unanimously, resolution 2178, that's on the foreign terrorist fighters, and in that strategy it was more comprehensive, and it could be seen as a framework that these Central Asian states can use to fight against the terrorism that comes from very different regions. So that framework is binding, and it requires states to actually, the Article 16, for example, it asks governments to work with the very local civil societies, very local leaders and communities. And it could be used as a framework, institutional framework, to work towards more integrated approach to fight terrorism. I want to just summarize my presentation by saying that with the integrated approach and strategy, I mean on integrating across two main categories. One is integration across stakeholders, that is international organizations, UN and regional organizations, the Arab League and other, for example, Istanbul process, and the local governments and local communities, tribal and religious leaders, and civil society. This is the integration across the stakeholders. These all units and actors needs to be integrated in the approach against fight against the terrorism. And the second part is integration across issues. The national security policies and the counterterrorism policies should be integrated into development policies, development in political, economic, and social spheres. So without integrating counterterrorism and counter-narcotics, without integrating that strategy to development strategies, you won't be able to solve it in the long term. And civil society development, particularly attention to moderate religious societies and interfaith dialogue among those were basically came out of the workshop we held at Yale recently, and I believe that this kind of, not the political institutional integration per se, but the issue-based integration to fight specifically this threat, it will be more productive and productive in fighting the terrorism. Thank you.
Thank you very much.